Our first presentation is by Dean Grantham. He works for the, you don't work for the Department of Environmental Quality. He works for the Department of Information Technology Systems, Services. DIT.
Information technology.
Okay.
We're still learning all these things.
It is. Well, and Dean actually is housed within our Department of Environmental Quality, and he works for our division, which is waste management, so I always think of him as one of our employees. Dean has over 18 years of experience with the implementation and integration of geographic information systems, global positioning systems, aerial and satellite imagery within government organizations. He currently works as an IT project manager. As I said, Dean holds a BS and an MS in natural resources from NC State University. For his BS, he concentrated in environmental science and soil science, and for his master's, he concentrated in spatial information systems. Go ahead, Dean.
All right. Thanks, Amy. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of go through this slide deck. I don't have very many slides, but I want to get to the point of showing the application at the end so that we can have more of an informal kind of time there and show you some of the things we did or that we're planning on releasing, that is. As she said, I'm with the Division of Waste Management, which is in the Department of Environmental Quality. Recently been moved to DIT, but I'm still kind of, I don't know, this is all new. I'll say duty stationed within DEQ, so I'm still working with them primarily. And what I wanted to start with was talk a little bit about some of the GIS data layers that we're offering and then the mechanism that we're using to disseminate that information. We've got a couple of things that are new. We're becoming heavy users of AGOL, which is what the application is based in that you'll see in just a little bit. But we've also got a number of other things that are all kind of pointing in that direction. So our core, and I'm going to first speak to just DWM specific. So our core areas within DWM are our Superfund section, hazardous waste, solid waste, underground storage tanks, which are primarily around petroleum-based kind of products. You can think about gas stations and that kind of thing. But it does span the gamut to other things that are stored in underground storage tanks and above ground too. And then our brownfields redevelopment program. Each one of these core areas has sort of a group of data sets. Some of them have more than one data set. Some of them just have one. But it's things like hazardous waste sites. Within the Superfund section, we have inactive hazardous sites, pre-regulatory landfills, dry cleaning solvent cleanup act sites, underground storage tanks or petroleum release instance, registered tanks. All of these things are available via our website. So you don't really have to jot all these down. I'm going to show some links toward the end of the presentation so you can get to them. Again, all of these are sort of core GIS layers, if you will. Most of them are point-based layers, and I'll get to that in a little bit in relation to part of some of the limitations of the application I'm going to show you. The way that you get to these is first through our DWM webpage. This is where you can engage things like our web maps. You can download at the moment shapefiles, and you can also hook into our feature services that we're offering. I would really like to point you toward engaging our feature services because those are the things that we're really focusing on as far as our update schedule and our metadata and things of that nature. We're looking at an open data page. How many people have used open data from other sites, or how many people have an open data site? Okay. One of the things that we're getting through open data is that we can feed it a service and then download or retrieve out a shapefile or a feature file geodatabase, so on and so forth, or CAD file or KMZ or Google file, what have you. So it makes it really easy. Rather than me having to have multiple link options and maintain all of that, I can just kind of feed it into that. Within each one of those, of course, there's item details page, which gets you to an overview, description, some of the metadata, some of those kinds of issues. I'm sure that this is a GIS community, so you guys are familiar with what that's going to look like or what it does look like. One of the things I mentioned that I wanted folks to engage our feature service as a primary. One of the things that within DWM we're kind of we have to deal with is that most of our data, or a lot of our data, is housed in our document management system. So we have a lot of reports. We have a lot of monitoring things, site evaluations, the whole gambit, land use notices, land use restrictions. All of that is housed as electronic documents. So a lot of those things don't really correspond that well to a list of attributes, if you will. We need to put people into that. So through our feature services, we're rolling out this way that we can click on a point and then be able to get directly to our document management system without you having to know what the ID is or what the facility name is or the address or what have you. You'll see this illustrated a little bit later on in the application, but I wanted to mention it here as well. The easiest way to engage our data is through our embedded web maps. And again, most of those, if not all of those data sets that I'd mentioned before on our website have an embedded web map. And then that allows you to interact with the data directly. Those are in one place right now. We're kind of looking at how we can roll some of those out and make them more extensible throughout the website. And then the last two, at the department level, we do have this is our first ArcGIS online page so that you could get to things like our featured applications, some of our data sets and those kinds of things. The application that I'm going to show you is, I'll go ahead and preface it by saying that it's a draft application right now. It's a prototype, if you will. When we get ready to release it, it will be advertised through this page. This is the way that you would be able to hook directly into it or find what that address is, since we're a little bit prior to. I'm showing you something that's in sort of beta form, if you will. This is our AGOL page. The next slide, I think, is our open data page. So you get to kind of a lot of the same functionality. Again, this is not really earth-shattering information. I'm sure that most of you have seen these, but I wanted to mention it and let you know that DEQ is actively trying to pursue these different mechanisms to disseminate our information. And again, that idea of feature services, that's key at this point. You hear that over and over again. How do we educate the public? How do we get our information out there? That feature service kind of mechanism allows us to do that a lot more efficiently than having a shapefile download where we have to worry about what version of data that you've got. So say you downloaded something, 6 months later you call us and something has happened to that feature, it's been edited or maintained, So to our case study, which was the main point of this presentation. One thing I didn't mention when we were going through all of that title debacle, I've only been in this position about 2 years now, coming up on about 2 years. And one of the very first things that I was tasked with was this idea of this well permit decision tool. I'm going to kind of take you through the evolution of how that evolved over time, what kinds of things we considered, and so on and so forth. So to dive right in, we had a legislative request that said, okay, we need to educate the public. So if there's been a known release of contamination, you can see that that's in quotes. I'm going to come back to that in just a little bit. But if we have a known release of contamination within 1,000 feet of a proposed well site, we need to notify that landowner, or not really notify that landowner, or at least give them the information about what type of contamination had happened at that location or in close proximity to it within 1,000 feet. So we had to sort of think about that, and we were allowed to sort of come up with our data set and our application before we actually got the rule in place. So this is really one of those chicken or egg kind of things. Did I skip a? Okay. So the origins of that are some of the things that are stated here. Our 2C rules already restrict well drilling within a known contaminated aquifer. So an aquifer is a bigger area. A lot of times we have these contamination areas that are much smaller, and they may or may not affect the whole entirety of the aquifer, right? Our local health departments have some knowledge of where these releases may have occurred in the past, but they might not know all of them. And anybody here from environmental health? Anybody work in environmental health? Okay, how many county folks do we have? Okay, so essentially every county has an environmental health department, right? So they have, they're charged with this well permitting thing, or well permitting tool. or not tool, but application. So there's an idea of we wanted to make this an educational component. And again, we had to keep it sort of simple because the applicant that comes in simply wants their permit. They want to move on down their development road. So we had to have something that was quick, that was easy to use, didn't require a lot of management or training or what have you. So what we set out to do was to develop something that was, again, quick and easy, simple online tool. We wanted it to be a conversation starter. We didn't want it to be a defensible map that said something that restricted somebody from drilling a well in a particular area. We only wanted to educate them to the potential of contamination that may exist in that area. So that's an important concept to grasp. And then some of the questions that we had to answer. Well, we're talking about contamination, so it's known to whom, okay? Is it just somebody within DEQ, or is it local, or what have you? What is the release of contamination? What was actually released there? How much? What's the location or boundary of the source? This is an important concept that I'll get back to in just a little bit. Do we know those kinds of things? How did we determine these things? Okay, and the answer to those questions is known to DEQ or the county. Those were the only principal folks that we felt like had data inventories that could support this sort of decision tool. This is where the data is going to originate from. The release of contamination is defined by the programs. So we let them have the freedom to say this constituted a known release of contamination. This did not. So what you'll see in the application a little bit later on is not merely a map of our entire inventory of facilities. So it's not every underground storage tank. It's not every hazardous waste site. It's not every Superfund site, but it's just those that we've deemed that have had some resulting release of contamination. And that varied by section. And then the site characterization. This was one of the things that I was pointing to. What I've mentioned is all derivative data. It's data that exists in other database systems where we're merely tracking an X coordinate and a Y coordinate. So what that means is that we've got a point-based data set. Well, where that coordinate originates from is different based on who the inspector was, a lot of cases, even within the same data. It could be a driveway point. It could be the centroid of a parcel. It could be actually placed at the spot of the incident if we knew where that was. It could be a building structure. There's a lot of different scenarios that you can get in. But I stress that point to say this. Remember that this was mathematically based. We had that 1,000-foot buffer, okay? So if we're looking at a point on a map within 1,000 feet, some things might fall out or might be included when they didn't need to be. So keep that in mind. Locations came from essentially waste management, or the Division of Waste Management, which I represent. And then we do have some data that came from the Division of Water Resources. So you'll see that in the data structure when we get to that stage. Some of the next step was to say, okay, we've got our potential suites of information. How do we go about marrying those things together and getting them into a consolidated data set? So the only things that we could support there were the incident number or the EPA tracking number or some type of tracking number, facility name in most cases, facility address. In others, we were able to assess an area, those kinds of things. And the final thing is an agency contact. So we wanted to be able to empower ever who was using the data or ever who was engaging the application with whom they needed to contact to get further information. Again, that idea of being a conversation starter, that was what we wanted to achieve here. And the final thing was we wanted to sort of group those into major groups of contaminants to recommend or to be used to recommend further water sampling. So if you needed to maybe be more curious about metals based on the release or VOCs or pesticides, et cetera, okay? So that's what it basically looked like. We've got these two groups, DWM, DWR, that are feeding data into this one consolidated system. And you can see the data dictionary there is quite simplistic. Site ID, site address, those kinds of things that I just mentioned. But that was what we could support over all of our databases, or all of these parent sources of data. So what we chose to do was develop a web-based application that would allow all of these different queries to be ran, allow that query and browse kind of operation. And then at the same time, offer a data service so more sophisticated counties that wanted just to take our data and take it over into their own application or build their own application out of it could engage that as well. So we've got two sort of competing ideas there. Some of the things that we are trying to resolve and have yet to resolve are things like our update process. How often are we going to go about updating this? Is this going to be something that we're going to do weekly or monthly as far as these data inventories, or maybe it's set per section or set per data steward, so to speak? What are the known risks, geoprocessing cost? How is it going to be paid for? How are we going to leverage this technology and get it out there? And then we also wanted to get stakeholder feedback. So we wanted to make sure that we were achieving what we had started out to do. So I wanted to, like I say, I was kind of quick, but I wanted to show you the application, and this is it. And again, this is an AGOL-based or an ArcGIS Online-based application. It's not real shocking information here. But you can see that we're actively engaging some of our own data, as well as some of the other data sets from around the state. Some DOT data is what you'll see. You'll see the parcel service that's engaged there as well. When we start to use it, I'll take you through it a couple of different ways. If I can get all my fingers to work here. So as we zoom in, you'll see more and more information start showing up. So at that point, you see the instance show up, and that's that known releases of contamination instant layer that I've been talking about. Still refreshing. Okay, and those are the different data constituents there, just to give you an idea of how many different pieces of information we're combining there, or we're putting all together. Okay, from all different sections within, again, DWR, Division of Water Resources, and DWM, Division of Waste Management. So let me see if I can get this to refresh one more time. It's getting hamstrung there. Okay, so if we click on one of those particular sites, you can see how that data is presented. The first and foremost is the site ID, site name, address, those kinds of issues or things. And then the more intriguing thing is we can go ahead and query our document management system. So this is running over to our DMS and looking at everything that participates with that, or that has that particular site ID in it. And we can see that we had one there that was Stantonsburg dump. If we look at it, I'm not sure exactly what it is. I pick a different one each time. Okay, so it's just, this happened to be a hurricane landfill assessment project report. So you can see sort of the power of what we're trying to leverage there. Because again, keep in mind that we've got a vast array of information that's stored in our document management system, but that information was not always accessible through any other database. So we were trying to link these two things together and make them play nice. So a couple of other things that we can do is we can answer the question that we set out to do, which was, okay, show me everything that's within 1,000 feet of here. Okay, I picked poorly there because there was nothing within 1,000 feet of there, but let me zoom out to a more populated area. Yeah. Well, okay. So in this particular case, it's rather rudimentary. It only selected one, but we could look at what the closest facility was, and then the sites within that, which there's just one in this situation. But we could also download a file of that, maybe attach it to the permit, or the Environmental Health Department could attach it to the permit and say, these are the things that are within that proximity to where you were. One other feature is we had an idea of having a fact sheet. So I'd mentioned this idea of having contacts or being able to get to the contacts within our division. So you found the site, you found who it belongs to. This is an inactive hazardous site. If we clicked on the contents or the fact sheet, so to speak, we could scroll through this and figure out who within that section, or what section that belongs to. And you can see here that that's an inactive hazardous sites branch site that was in the attribute table that was presented before. And you can see what type of contaminants may exist at that site, and then who the relative contacts were for that. So it's a way that we felt like we were tying a lot of information together through something that was very easy to use. Maps are something that we've come to take for granted, in my opinion. Everybody's looking for sort of that Google experience. We want to fire something up and be able to interact with it directly without having to know what the facility name was, or what, any of those kinds of other attributes that we would have to query this system with. So by utilizing, an AGOL-based application and geography in the background, we were able to serve that need and get to a lot of information very quickly. So I'm on yellow now, so that means I got 10 minutes. So I was trying to go as quick as I could. So there's a couple other things I could show you about the application, but I'd like to have any kind of questions that you might have about it, or respond to any questions. Sure. That's a very good question. The question was, just for the recording, that plumes are sometimes involved with these sites or these facilities. That's exactly right. And in most cases, we don't have that information in a geographic form. We are working on some things that will help us to get a little bit closer to that, but we don't have the ability to do that across all of our sites because they're in the thousands. There's a lot that goes into this data set. So being able to model each one of those would be very expensive to get those kinds of modeling reports done. So, the answer to your question is no, we can't do that, but we can get you as close as we can and at least get you the contacts that we need to see if there is any extra information or any other information that we could engage at that point. Fair? Can you expand the buffer? You can. You can. And again, these are kind of just stock tools, but if we go back here, it's on the slider, so we can do it larger, and get more and more area, that kind of thing. So, and it does the same math behind the background. Yes, ma'am. That'd be great if we did. So the question was, there was a question whether we had a wells database. The answer to that question is no, we don't have that, unfortunately. Although moving into the future, we are looking at ways that we can model that data through other software. And if that comes online, then I'd see that as a direct way to feed into this. So because it'll be just another piece of information that kind of goes into that decision-making process. And at the end of the day, that's what we wanted to do. So is be able to have that good educational tool. I think AGOL here has proven its worth in that it is a fairly economical, cheap solution once you get inside of that and be able to store data, because you can combine information from a lot of different sources as well as host your own, and then build an application that is very specific to what you need with very little programming involved. Essentially, the only thing we've got is the document management piece that's had to be customized. Any other questions? Another one? Could you repeat that kind of?
The fact sheet that you had on your site, is that automated so it sorts the information out?
Which one were you talking about? The program fact sheet is the same per each one. So every one of those constituents, their relative groups would, kind of link that one to one. So, so that fact sheet is just what it says. It's a fact sheet. So, right. And the idea being that if we engage the feature service, then we could pass all of that to someone that was maybe using this outside of this application, so that when they click on that pop-up, they're still getting all of that information. It was kind of a security measure for us because we didn't want to just give the data away without having some control over the education of the user, or at least give them the ability to get to that information and know what these things were, or at least give them that conversation starter. That's what we were after. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am. We have yet to determine that, but since it's still a draft sort of application, but the way that it's structured was done initially so that we could pull it apart and push it back together very efficiently and script a lot of those things out so that we could run them autonomously. It's my view that we're probably looking at, say, monthly updates or maybe even more than that. I would really rather, I think it's going to be relative to where the data is coming from, what section the data is coming from, because some doesn't change all that much. Others changes very rapidly. UST, for instance, changes very rapidly. Active permitted landfills changes not very much. So, okay. Any other questions? All right, got about 4 minutes.